You open the fridge. You scan 3 shelves of food you didn't grow, didn't hunt, and didn't even choose this week. You grab something. You eat it standing up. It takes maybe 90 seconds. You probably think this is the strange part of human history. The convenience, the abundance, the fact that food just appears. But the real answer is far stranger. For most of the time humans have existed, there was no such thing as a meal plan. There was no such thing as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There was only the question every single day asked, what is available, and is it worth the risk of going to get it? Picture a small group walking across a dry grassland 2 million years ago. They are not hunting a mammoth. They are not roasting a steak over a fire. Most days they are digging. They are pulling tubers out of the ground with sharpened sticks. They are cracking open bones left behind by lions, scraping out the marrow with stone flakes. They are picking through ant nests for fat-rich larvae. Meat, when it happened, was a windfall, not a plan. This is where the popular idea of the caveman gets it wrong. You picture a man with a spear, dragging home dinner. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe spent years living among the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last groups on Earth who still foraged the way humans did for most of history. What he documented wasn't constant meat, it was variety, day-to-day uncertainty, and a diet built mostly around plants, with meat as an irregular bonus, not a daily guarantee. Why does this matter to you, sitting in a kitchen 10,000 generations later? Because your body was built by this uncertainty, not by abundance, by scarcity, and by flexibility. Here's where the deep dive gets strange. For decades, scientists assumed early human ancestors ate mostly soft fruit, the way chimpanzees do. Then researchers started looking at something nobody thought to check: their teeth. Dental calculus is the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth over a lifetime. It traps tiny particles of whatever a person ate. Anthropologist Amanda Henry studied this calculus on the teeth of Neanderthals, a cousin species that lived alongside early humans. What she found surprised almost everyone in her field: microscopic starch granules, cooked starch granules, from plants like wild grains and root vegetables. This meant something huge. Neanderthals, often imagined as brutal meat-only hunters, were cooking plants, tens of thousands of years before farming existed. Cooking changes everything, by the way. Raw starch is almost impossible for the human gut to break down efficiently. Cooked starch unlocks far more calories from the same plant. Some researchers, including primatologist Richard Wrangham, argue that the discovery of fire and cooking may be one of the single biggest turning points in human evolution. Not the spear, not the wheel, the fire pit. Cooking gave early humans more energy from less food. More energy meant more fuel for something incredibly expensive to run: your brain. The human brain burns through roughly 20% of your daily energy, despite being only about 2% of your body weight. That ratio doesn't exist in most other animals. Something had to pay for it. Plants paid for some of it, fire paid for the rest. But plants and roasted starch weren't the whole story either. Move the timeline forward to the southern coast of what is now South Africa, around 164,000 years ago. Archaeologist Curtis Marion excavated a site called Pinnacle Point, and what he uncovered rewrote part of the human food story again. Shellfish, mussels specifically. Early humans were cracking open shells along the coastline, eating one of the most nutrient-dense foods available to them. Shellfish are loaded with omega-3 fatty acids, the exact kind of fat the brain needs to build and repair itself. Why does that matter? Because this was happening during a period when much of inland Africa was cold, dry, and difficult to survive in. The coastline may have been a kind of lifeline, a backup food source that kept small groups of humans alive through a harsh stretch of climate history. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. There was no single ancient human diet. Not one. Depending on where your ancestors lived, on what continent, near what coastline, in what climate, they were eating completely different things. Some groups ate mostly tubers and roots. Some ate mostly shellfish. Some, in colder northern climates, ate mostly animal fat and organ meat, because plants were scarce for half the year. Inuit populations historically survived on diets that were almost entirely meat and fat, and thrived doing it. So if someone tells you there's one true ancient human diet, the science says otherwise. The defining feature of the human diet was never a specific food. It was the ability to eat almost anything, depending on what the environment offered. That flexibility is the real adaptation, not a list of approved foods. A brain and a gut built to adjust. Now here's the counterintuitive twist. You'd think more variety meant more freedom, more enjoyment, more pleasure around food. In some ways it did, but it also meant constant calculation. Every single day, foragers had to weigh effort against reward. Dig for 2 hours and maybe find a tuber, or wait by a watering hole and maybe scavenge a carcass. This back and forth shaped something in your brain that is still running today. The reward circuitry that lights up when you find calorie-dense food. That craving for something fatty, salty, or sweet isn't a personal weakness. It's an ancient survival algorithm. In an environment where calories were never guaranteed, craving the densest, most efficient source of energy kept people alive. The problem is, that algorithm never got a software update. Walk into a grocery store today, and that same ancient brain is scanning shelves built by food scientists who understand exactly how to trigger it. Hyperpalatable combinations of fat, sugar, and salt that almost never occurred together in nature. Your brain isn't broken when it craves a bag of chips at 9 p.m. It's running code written for a world that hasn't existed in over 10,000 years. This is the modern mirror. The instinct that once helped a person survive an unpredictable grassland is the same instinct steering a shopping cart down a brightly lit aisle. Same hardware, completely different environment, and it goes deeper than cravings. Think about how often you eat alone now, scrolling a phone, barely registering the meal. For most of human history, eating was almost never a solitary act. Sharing food, especially meat from a successful hunt, was one of the primary ways early human groups built trust and social bonds. Splitting a meal wasn't generosity exactly. It was survival strategy. Groups that shared food outcompeted groups that hoarded it because shared risk meant shared safety during the inevitable bad days. So the next time you eat with other people, something ancient is quietly happening underneath the conversation. The bonding you feel isn't incidental to the meal. For most of human history, it was the entire point of the meal. Here's what's easy to miss in all of this. Humans never had a golden age of perfect eating. There was no era where every ancestor ate exactly what their body needed, in perfect balance, free of struggle. There was only adaptation, trial, error, coastlines explored, routes tested, some foods that worked, and plenty that didn't. The species didn't succeed because it found the right diet. It succeeded because it could survive on almost any diet the world handed it. That's a strange kind of comfort, actually. You don't need to find the one true way humans are supposed to eat because it never existed. What existed was adaptability, curiosity, and the willingness to dig a little deeper into the ground when nothing else was working. So tonight, when you open the fridge again and you grab something without thinking twice about where it came from, remember what that simple motion actually represents. Not laziness, not disconnection from nature. The end result of millions of years spent solving the exact same problem your ancestors solved every single day, just with far less effort and far less risk. You open the fridge. But what you're really opening is the answer to the oldest question your species ever asked.